Olayinka, thank you so much for joining us on the news.
Good morning. Good afternoon, sorry. It's morning where I am.
Okay.
Thank you for having me on the program.
Understandably, we understand. Now, how does this new minimum wage align with existing economic policies and goals in Nigeria, especially in terms of inflation and economic growth?
Well, thank you very much. So for me, I'll start from the point of view of considering that this is something, we move from one point to get to where we are now. So like the saying goes, have a loaf is better than nothing. However, having said that, looking at the current economic realities of the country, the increment for me is really nothing to celebrate. There's nothing to rejoice about, considering that, the last statistics from the Bureau of Statistics showed that the current inflation rate is about 34%. And in addition to that, the current economy as it is, it's a highly dollarized economy, meaning that most of the articles that are consumed within the country are imported from abroad. So putting all of this into perspective, if you do a rough conversion of this amount of 70,000 that the government is proposing, it leaves you about $46 for workers to sustain on in a month. I mean, let's get very serious here. So for me, it's really nothing to celebrate either by the only people that are celebrating. I've seen the pictures of the meeting between the labor leaders and the government, and as far as I'm concerned, the only people that are happy about this development are the labor leaders and the government officials for reasons best known to them. So, but again, it is something at the end of the day. It will bring some sort of belief to the workers, but looking at the long term, I mean, with all the other challenges existing within the country, the power situation is nothing to write home about. The infrastructure is highly deficient within the country. So all of this put together, it's really not, it's nothing to celebrate as far as I'm concerned.
Well, looking at the current exchange is about $42 to $43 if we are to put the 70,000 naira in perspective. But then for you, when it comes to implementation now of this minimum wage, fine, you've said that there's nothing to celebrate or to write home about. But then when it comes to implementation, what are the challenges that you think, sectors and regions will face across board in Nigeria, both from the federal to the subnational to the private sectors too?
Yeah, I'm very glad that you brought this particular issue up, because as we all know, Nigeria is a federal state. So the fact that the federal government has reached an agreement with Labour does not necessarily mean that all the states are bound by this. And again, even if there is an understanding that this should be implemented across board, you have to consider the economic realities of many of the states. I mean, we have a lot of states in Nigeria that are currently owing workers arrears of many months in salary. That was when the minimum wage is 30,000 naira. So now with this increment and the way it usually operates, when there's an increase of minimum wage like this, there's a corresponding increment across all levels within the civil service. So with states that are currently owing salary, to what extent can we say confidently that they'll be able to pay this minimum wage? And now that is even leaving the government circle. If you go into the private sector, how many organizations with the current economic realities, with all the challenges of paying for power every day, inflation, cost of living crisis, high cost of production and all of that, how many organizations can afford to pay this minimum wage? And then there is another issue that I am usually concerned about in situations like this, in terms of enforcement and implementation. So the previous minimum wage of 30,000 naira, could we say confidently that across all states of the federation, that is going to the private sector now, that all employers of labor were paying the 30,000 naira as the minimum wage? So now with this increment, is there any guarantee from the government that would ensure that private sector employers are able to pay this amount? So these are issues that I think labor should really be more concerned about. But most often, from experience, it is usually the situation that when people talk about minimum wage, they are usually fixated on government paying salary. But the truth of the matter is that the private sector is also a very component aspect of the Nigerian economy. And to that extent, if there is no procedures in place to ensure that the minimum wage is enforced across board, then it leaves a lot of issues for consideration.
Well, we've also seen the House of Reps yesterday coming out to say that they'll be slashing their salaries by 50%, giving about 300,000 naira per month, approximately 648 million naira for 6 months to actually boost food security in the country and deal with the issue around cost of living crisis in the country. Do you think that would anyway placate the situation as it affects Nigerians moving forward?
Well, with due respect to the National Assembly, I think they should really get serious. And I'm saying this because as Nigerians, we see every time and we hear every time in the news the things that go on in the National Assembly. Now, let's leave the salary on one side. What about the allowances? Because for the National Assembly members, that is where the bulk of their pay comes from. We see every year the amount of money they vote for car allowance, newspaper allowance, furniture allowance, all sorts of allowances, aids, and all of that. So if your salary is just like a fraction, a negligible fraction of your total earning, and you're saying that you're forgoing half of that, while the humongous amount that you collect every month as allowances, really.
But the allowances are running costs. It's to help them run their office. They have multiple aides that work with them that they need to pay.
Well, yeah, I agree with you on that they need to run their offices. But looking at the lifestyle of the elected leaders, legislators, the kind of opulent lifestyle that they live, can we really say that the amount of money that they vote every year as the allowances, can we really say that it is justified in relation to the economic realities of the country? Now, just last year, they took delivery, was in the news that they took delivery of SUVs, the average cost of which was about 160 million naira or more, even for senators. So can we say that is justified, even if they have to run their offices?
So invariably, you are calling for, Olayinka, invariably you are calling for austerity measures across board, across the 3 tiers of government, or let's say the 2 tiers of government, if you're hoping to have enough fiscal cash to run the administration. Is that what you mean?
Exactly, if that is what will solve the situation of the problems of this country. Because again, if you are talking about the legislators, we shouldn't also forget the executive themselves. I mean, it's in the news recently that the controversy about the acquisition of a new private jet for our president. And it was reported in some news media that the jet has been procured already for about 250, the conversion rate to naira is about 150 billion naira.
Okay.
Now, looking at all of this happening, so it is very difficult to accept that 70,000 naira is the best that the government can come up with as minimum wage. Again, if you look at, like I mentioned, the conversion rate, which you also even corrected me, I said it was about $56. You said it should come to about $42. I mean, where I live abroad, the people you will categorize as the lowliest of workers make more than this in a couple of hours in one day. So really,
okay. Well, it means the country still has a long way to go when it comes to minimum wage and what is payable. Thank you so much, Olayinka Aileru, for joining us to talk about this.
You're very much welcome.